Dr. Toby Watson.
Thank you. Mic-wise, you're connected now, and everything is good with the mic? Okay, good. I appreciate you having me here. I'm glad to come back and talk about this a little bit. And today what I thought we'd do is a little bit different from what we did last time. Last time I think I gave you a lot of statistics, and I told you a little bit about just how we diagnose people as a psychologist or psychiatrist, which is extremely subjective. It's a checkoff list. For those of you that don't know or didn't hear the last talk that I gave, it's a book, a DSM they call it, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. It's our Bible. It's the physician desk reference for psychologists and psychiatrists, and it's basically a checkoff list. Every diagnosis that we can give is nothing that was discovered, like through, physical tissue or autopsy, like cancer and diabetes and things like that, real medical disorders. All the psychiatric disorders are created. It's a committee. People like me, psychologists, psychiatrists, come together like this in a big group, and we say, hey, let's come up with a name of something, and we vote on it. And if people agree or disagree, it gets included. 1 year, it's called this, and a couple years later, it could be called something different. We just got a new book last year, the 5th edition of it. It's about that thick now. The 4th edition was just a little bit less. Every one of them in the committee that comes up with these labels have drug company ties. They're paid consultants by the drug companies. Every one of them. In fact, the former chief of the book, Alan Francis, the doctor who was in charge of it, even acknowledged that there's no validity to it. Now that he's not on the 5th committee. So the next book came out, he was able to be honest about the 4th book. So it doesn't mean that the symptoms aren't real. It doesn't mean like, hey, when we see somebody who we diagnose or label schizophrenic or bipolar or severely depressed, it doesn't mean that they don't have real problems. They do. It doesn't mean that there could be a biological change that happens. If my wife dies, been with her, knock on wood, 26 years, if she dies, I guarantee you I'm going to be devastated for a long time. The DSM says I got, 2 months, I think? After that, it's a psychiatric disorder. It's a brain chemical imbalance. 2 months, that's how long you get. So when your spouse or somebody passes on, that's all you get. Then they say you're ill and you need to take a drug. And that is literally what they say. 1 in 5 Americans right now takes a psychotropic drug. 1 in 5. I doubt probably this group, but if I go into that restaurant and I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you, 1, 2, 3, right down the line. For kids, in some areas, it's worse. In some communities, it's worse. Out on the West Coast, there's cities out there where half of the population in the city is taking a psychotropic drug. Half. Medicaid kids are worse. They get 4 to 5 times as many psychotropic drugs as a child who has private health insurance. So if they're state-funded, your tax dollars, 5 times as many, maybe, medications. So where does this talk go, and how do I fall into this? What I want to do is I want to tell you a story. And this is a story about a guy who saw that this was happening, and I'm very much of a libertarian, although I don't, I have some liberal views, some conservative views, but I did recognize one thing. I recognized Medicaid costs were absolutely skyrocketing, absolutely out of control, and I was wondering why. And what I recognized is psychotropic medications were skyrocketing with it. We spend $300 billion a year on psychotropic meds. $300 billion. The problem is that Congress recognized and said, hey, we recognize if we're going to pay for this, the Medicaid program, we want to make sure we're getting some bang for our buck. We want drugs only be used for our Medicaid patients if they're for a medically indicated indication, medically accepted indication. And they defined that. Luckily, they defined what that meant. What they said is that it has to be FDA approved for the exact purpose. So no off-label prescriptions. For those of you who don't know, you have drugs out in the community. Let's say 4,000 drugs out there, a little over that. If I come in and let's say I have a sleep problem, a doctor could write a prescription for anything. He could give me a statin, a cholesterol drug if he felt it would work. He can do anything he wants. That's the doctor's right to do that. But Congress said, yeah, but we're not going to allow you to do that for our drugs if you want to get paid by Medicaid. You have to have a medically accepted indication. So it's got to be approved by the FDA for the intended purpose. Or they said if there's literature out there, support in the peer-reviewed literature, it says, yeah, this is safe and effective, and the FDA just hasn't caught up yet, you could still use it. And they gave 3 different books, compendia as they call them. And they said, if you fall into one of those and there's research, then you can do it. And they do follow this, for the most part, for everything else, except for psychotropic drugs. I used to own a building that had a clinic in it, one of the Aurora pharmacies. And I talked with the pharmacists there, and they told me, they said, well, sure. And they said, Toby, you know, if we get a prescription, it's not one of these approved, we have a form that we have to fill out, and we give it back to the doctor, and the doctor then, we say, hey, this isn't approved under Medicaid. What do you want to do with this? Do you want to change it up for this drug, which is approved, or do you want to get special permission? And then the doctor would say what they want to do. Not true for psychotropics. Not true for the kids in Wisconsin. Doctors, mostly primary care physicians, but also psychiatrists. Most drugs, actually about 90% of all psychotropics, psychiatric drugs, are written by primary care physicians, not even by psychiatrists. So you can know where the drug companies have targeted their interests. It's the primary care people. But if you're a little boy on Medicaid, you come in, you say, hey, you know, I got some sleep problems. There you go. They write you out a prescription. And they don't look at any of the compendia or anything else, whether it's approved or not. They don't care. In fact, most physicians, I don't think, even know that they have to follow any rules or guidelines. They don't want to know. And they're writing out prescriptions for things that really don't have a lot of support for it. For example, little Billy comes in with anxiety. They give him an antipsychotic drug, a neuroleptic. Those are the most powerful drugs that you can imagine. These used to be called chemical lobotomizers because they literally would make people feel like they had a lobotomy. Those are the people you see drooling and, you know, and kind of stumbling along or maybe shaking. That drug was supposed to be for less than 1% of the population. Do you know what the #1 selling drug out of all the drugs, the statins, anything, you name it, the #1 selling drug right now? Well, Ridley would have been a good answer about 10 to 15 years ago. You're right. It's an antipsychotic, risperidone. Antipsychotics in general are the most profitable drug right now. A few years back, I remember, I think it was risperidone, $5.4 billion in sales, just from that one drug. And you say, well, how did that happen? How did you go from a small little sliver to this? It's a blockbuster. They're making more money off this than anything. Off-label prescriptions. Doctors are targeted by drug companies with promotions and the drug reps and all the advertising and all these free conferences in Malibu and Maui where they say, hey, come on, we want to talk about this. We'll pay for you to come and listen to our, speech. And they plug it and they say, look, especially for the elderly. Right now, the elderly and children are the most 2 vulnerable populations, the biggest economy or biggest customer base that they're targeting right now. Why? Children can't say no, and if you're in a retirement home, you can't say no. And if you give them an antipsychotic drug, guess what? They get quiet. They get real quiet. They don't fuss much. They don't really care. That's what they call chemical lobotomizers. Zombie effect, spellbinding effect. There's lots of phrases that they use in the literature. So they started targeting the drug companies. But the FDA said, wait a minute, you can't target these kids and elderly for insomnia or mild aggression or this because it's not FDA approved for it. We're coming after you. And they did. So federal court goes after these drug companies. What do? 2009, Eli Lilly pays $1.4 billion in criminal and civil penalties for off-label promotion of Zyprexa, an antipsychotic. Pfizer, $2.3 billion in illegal off-label promotion of Geodon, another antipsychotic. AstraZeneca agreed to pay $520 million for off-label of Seroquel. Forest, $309 million for Lexapro and Celexa, and then the last one was then risperidone, which I forget the exact, but it was over $200 billion. No, $200 million. I'm blanking on that one. Scratch that. Too many numbers. They're paying them all out. But you know what? Their sales, crime pays. They don't mind because they're making $300 billion off of it. That's their sales. So they don't mind $2 million here, $500 million here, $2 billion there. No big deal. So you think, okay, well, how does that affect us here in Wisconsin? That's the feds. What's Wisconsin doing? Wisconsin is doing the same thing. They're seeing, hey, wait a minute, they're marketing our doctors and stuff for off-label. We should come after them and go after these drug companies and recapture some money. J.B. Van Holen publicly announced, this is going back 2013, November 5th, This is in my statement of the lawsuit that I brought against one of the psychiatrists. They went after and recaptured $7.2 million for off-label promotion of one of the drugs listed in Wisconsin's QTAM lawsuit against Risperdal, the antipsychotic. They indicated, quote, caused false and fraudulent claims to be submitted or caused purchases by the government funded by the CARE program, including the state Medicaid program. So what they're saying is, look, the feds went after these drug companies because they marketed to the doctor. They said, hey, give it to the elderly, give it to the kids. It works, it's great, it's great. Sales skyrocketed. Medicaid got on board, started giving it to everybody. Our costs were skyrocketed. We said, what's going on here? We started having problems because all these people going on these drugs started developing diabetes, congestive heart failure, premature death, tardive dyskinesia, all these problems down the road. And then they said, we want our money back, at least some of it. So they make it look like they're getting some of this money back, but they're getting a small fraction. But the damage is done. The drug companies have already done their damage to all the doctors, and they're prescribing. So I came up with this attorney out of Alaska, Harvard grad guy, who, by the way, used to be schizophrenic, who's no longer schizophrenic because he got off the meds, and actually he's, is known as URI. And that's not saying a whole lot about me, but but he ends up going back to Harvard and graduates, and he does this work. So we take, and I say, look, hey, if the drug companies are responsible for false claims, they're submitting a claim to Medicaid saying, give us money because we want to use risperidone. Mind you, they could give a whole bunch of other drugs. They could use some other medicine. I'm not totally against medications. I'm against misleading people and doing illegal stuff for profit that way. You want to make a profit, I'm all for it. But you got to play somewhat fair. And if you sign an agreement saying you're not going to try to use this drug, you can't then submit it to the government saying, now give me the money. Because here's what's happening. Risperidone could be about $400 for a prescription. I can give you an off-label drug that might work even better and different. It'll cost you $20. Multiply that by tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of prescriptions. Now you have an idea of what kind of numbers we're talking about in Wisconsin. In one drug, just one drug, there's a study that they looked at. It was anticonvulsant drug, Neurontin, a gabapentin, was issued without any relationship to the diagnosis. So again, someone's diagnosed and say, oh, let's just use this instead. Not okay, not approved. The off-label cost $40 million to the state of Wisconsin. That was just one study that they happened to do in this state where we looked at it. That was $40 million for that one drug, and that's not even one of the big blockbusters. So I went after and said, let's go after the doctors. They should know better. They signed these agreements saying they're not going to use these drugs if they go with Medicaid. Most of the doctors don't even know about it. They don't even follow it because they never were told because Medicaid's not telling them. Meanwhile, you got the Attorney General saying, we're suing the drug companies because we know they're causing false claims. Except when I sued the doctors then, one doctor, who wrote off a whole mess of prescriptions for a little Billy Jim, little boy, over a period of time. And I said, wait, all these prescriptions are off-label. I went as a whistleblower lawsuit. It's called a QTAM lawsuit. Any of you could do it. Anybody who knows that the government's being frauded against, whether it be the post office or Medicaid, doesn't matter what. But if you got a job and say, wait a minute, I know this ain't right and they're screwing the government, you can have a whistleblower lawsuit called the QTAM. That's just what I did. I said, hey, I got these records here, this patient, this is what's happening. So we go to court. We battled for years over it, last couple of years. And the judge dismisses it. Federal judge says, nope, get out of here, you're wrong. We appeal it. We go to the 7th District Court down in Chicago. They overturn it and say, no, you're absolutely right, Dr. Watson. It's exactly what Congress said. You cannot give that prescription for off-label if it's not on a compendia. And that's exactly what they did. Boom, back into the federal courthouse. I ultimately dropped the lawsuit. I had to withdraw from it. You can read about it if you want online somewhere. In a nutshell, I was threatened by the federal judge with sanctions, saying, you could lose. And he did this rant for about 20 minutes as we were literally standing there ready to start the trial. All of our stuff's ready. I spent $2,000 on just paperwork. We're ready to start. And he rants for 20 minutes and says, hey, no. You might get sanctioned with their attorney fees. Because if you lose, I'm going to order these attorney fees against you. Didn't quite say it like that, but he gave me about 7 examples where every case, that's exactly what they did, and he did. against people. And then he highlighted that these fees might be $250,000 roughly. So I had a really tough decision to make on whether I pursue and win or, and risk that 250 grand. I just couldn't do it. So I opted not to. Interestingly, and this is what really hurt us, the Attorney General is saying, hey, we're going after drug companies. It's illegal. Boom. On his website, very clear.
Wisconsin Attorney General?
Yes, J.B. Van Hollen. Holland, thank you. Yeah, on the website, it says, hey, this is what we're going after, and very clearly why. That it's about false marketing leading to false claims. It's exactly what we had as a case. I couldn't get them on the phone, couldn't get them to back us up. Instead, what happened was the Medicaid office at the last, ninth inning, all of a sudden comes in and gives the opposing counsel, a psychiatrist, an affidavit saying, we don't think it's off-label, or we don't think it's illegal. It's perfectly allowed within Medicaid. They give that. Meanwhile, they've been helping us all along because we got all those records through Medicaid. So they're talking again, helping us, being very polite and giving us everything. And then at the last minute, boom, they give them the affidavit and say, nope, it's perfectly okay. And I'm going, wait a minute. This branch of the government is saying it's perfectly okay. We have a federal judge in Chicago saying it's not okay, and it's a matter of law, which they can't Medicaid decide. I mean, the judge decides that. And we have JB over here saying, yep, you're right, it's false. However, we're not going to pursue it because we don't think, we're not going to give you any opinion because they just wouldn't let us know. I mean, I tried calling, they wouldn't talk to me. I asked for an interview, they wouldn't talk to me. Even after this case was settled and done, I called back and said, hey, I'd like to know what's going to happen here. Nope, not going to happen. I had a few friends that actually know the governor pretty well that donate to his campaign and help him and stuff. And I know Joe Lipon pretty well, being from Sheboygan. And I finally called Joe and I said, Joe, what's going on? I'm trying to recapture literally hundreds of millions of dollars for Wisconsin. My one case alone, to give you an idea, every prescription that they write is a false claim. It's $5,000 roughly to $12,000 fine per prescription, plus the cost of the prescription. Multiply that by how many prescriptions we had, which was a list about this big. We were talking about, I forget how many millions for that one case. But it was like over a couple $1 million, I know, for one case. Multiply that by, that doctor had, how many patients over the last 15, 20 years? And we did a sample. We actually just looked at a sample of how many patients and stuff, and we found dozens and dozens and dozens of patients that were routinely being done. So we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars. And Joe didn't get a call back, he said, after we talked. He called the governor, he called Medicaid office, and he called JB. And he said, Toby, after 2 weeks, and he called several times, he said, Toby, what do you got yourself into? He said, I get a call back always. He's like, I haven't gotten a call back, and I've called 2-3 times. And I'm like, so I told him the whole case and what was going on and stuff. He said, okay, I'll try again. I'll try to reach out to them and stuff. And he said, but I know what's going on. I mean, if you think about this, I get it. What's going on is that you have doctors who would be sued. There's a lot of doctors and a lot of money that gets funneled into politics. I get that. And as kind of a libertarian, I think people should have a lot of freedom. I think doctors should have the freedom to prescribe what they want. But here's the problem. They've signed an agreement with the government saying, I won't use these drugs because we know they're the most expensive drugs and they don't have efficacy. They don't work. Definitely not in the long term, and they cause harm. We recognize that when people take them, they work for a while, but then slowly you start to become dependent on them. It's like any drug. Coffee, caffeine, alcohol, crack cocaine, marijuana, doesn't matter what you take. They do one of two things. They either increase or decrease your neural functioning. That's all the drugs can do, increase or decrease. As you take it, you start to develop a tolerance to it. Same is true with psych drugs. This is why they start people on 20 milligrams of something, and it works for a while. But then it loses its effect, and they start having the very problem. Depression, anxiety, sadness, sleep problems, whatever it might be, hearing voices. And then they up the dose, 20 to 30. And then 30 to 40, 40 to 50, until you max out and you have so many side effects and twitching and insomnia and issues and that they switch you to a different drug. And this is the process of psychiatry. For some, and I'm all okay for it if that's what they want to do. That's not what I do. We try to figure out what's really going on for the person and get them some help. Right now, the Veterans Administration is in a world of crap, and I've worked with several senators right now who's investigating that, and I've been talking with them over the last few months about a lot of this, because they recognize what they're doing is they're giving the vets lots of massive amounts of psychotropics and not getting them counseling. Call it PTSD, call it war trauma, call it, combat syndrome. It's had many names over the last 3,000, 4,000 years, and it's been documented for thousands of years. When you go into war and you do inhumane things, where you have to go and fight for your freedom or for your survival, it's going to affect you. You're going to have a lot of issues. You cannot treat that with a drug. When you suffer an injury to your humanity, the only thing that's going to restore your humanity is humanity. Love, empathy, spirituality, compassion, play, laughter, art, all the things that make us human is what makes you whole again. A guy comes back and gets 5 minutes with the psychiatrist and they write out 3 or 4 prescriptions. Mind you, the antipsychotics are what they're using with antidepressants. And they walk out, all it does is suppress it for a little while. And the problem is that a lot of the drugs they're giving, especially the antidepressants, we know from their own research, and they admit it, it will increase their suicide rate. It'll increase their aggression. We know this. There's a black box warning right on it. It says, if you take this, you may develop suicidal ideation, aggression. And there's good research to support that's exactly true. That's what I lectured in Mexico about. They flew me down there to give a lecture to them for 2 hours on the exact nature of psychotropics, specifically antidepressants, causing kids in violence. Because they see all the school shootings that we've had over the last 20 years here. We're over 30, 35 of them now. Every one of them so far, I'll repeat, every school shooting we've had has been linked to psychotropic meds, meaning that person who did it was taking or just stopped taking a psychotropic known to cause violence and suicidal ideation. And yet they refuse to do any study to even just look and say, could there be a relation? Could it be causing it? Granted, it's correlational data. I mean, it could be some other things. It could be that they had major issues and that's what got them on the meds. Sure, but we should at least look at it, especially when we know these drugs cause it. Glenn Mullen and Moore, 2 researchers, in 2012 or 13, December 2013, 12, did a study of the FDA database. All they did is said, look, let's look at all the drugs out there. Let's just take a look at a little sample shot of all the drugs that are out there, FDA approved, and let's just see which ones cause aggression. Let's see which ones might be causing some violence, because we got a violent society. Let's figure out what's going on. And what do you think they found? And there's, like, mind you, like 4,200 drugs out on the market right now, I think. Disproportionate rate, the top 31 culprits, psychotropic drugs. And in particular, the antidepressants. These ones that are like Prozac, Paxil, Effexor, things like that. They found that those were the drugs that were causing the vast majority of it. And when we're talking about what kind of numbers, I should have this down in my head already, but too many lectures and too much data. We were talking about, in a short period of time, several thousand incidents of aggression, violence, homicidal ideation. There was like 300 homicides. And these are ones that basically, I see someone like you, there's no aggression, no issue, I'm your doctor, boom, you get a medication, and then you go home, and a week and a half later, you start flipping out, beating people up, or you try to kill somebody, or you try to kill yourself, or something happens. We take the medicine away, you tell me what happened, your wife tells me, or your family tells me what happened, I document it and I send it to the FDA and let them know, like, hey, this thing happened. And then all of a sudden the aggression goes away. We pretty much know this is what happened. It was the drug that caused it. That represents less than 1%. Doctors don't report it usually when it happens. Then they talk about it, it's very small. When you add it up and you look at the numbers, you're talking about hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people who have these types of episodes that wouldn't have it happen if they hadn't taken the drug. So the problem that I recognize is that we have drug companies who have free market, and they should have that, but they lie to the researchers like myself with statistical manipulation. They end up hiring ghostwriters. So let's say they come to my clinic and they say, hey, we want to do this trial. I say, okay, and I have 2 groups, one on the drugs, one not on the drugs, and I report to them and I say, hey, I think this group did better without the drugs based on my subjective report. They then say, oh, well, we don't like your data, we'll just get rid of it. We have 50 other studies going. We find 2 that are good. The 48, they bury. The 2 that found better, they give those to the FDA, and that's how they get approved. 2 clinical trials. That's all you need. And you can have as many failures as you want. That's how the FDA works. They've never tested anything. So, and even if my data looked marginally okay, what they'll do then is take the data, give it to a statistician, they'll manipulate however they want to do it, recode things like, say, you suicide while you're on the study. Well, that was a dropout. So when I read it, dropout rate, 2%. That could be people who just walked away, or it could have been somebody who just killed themselves. That's what happened in Paxil. So they recode things. And then they find out years later, oh, sorry, and they pay a fine, and that's the end of it. So doctors aren't being given the information, honestly, and they don't know what's really happening. And then you get the Medicaid doctors who are targeted. Boom, Medicaid costs skyrocket. You end up flipping the bill for it, and people ultimately start to become disabled. Robert Whitaker wrote a book, Anatomy of an Epidemic. I mentioned it last time I was here. A must-read. He highlights exactly what's happened and highlights the longer you stay on a psychotropic and the higher dose even, as this goes like this on the graph, you look at the disability rate for mental health. Identical. What we're doing is we are slowly disabling Americans by giving them psychotropics because their brain starts to get addicted, and they literally get dementiated. Grace Jackson, a researcher, wrote a book called The Perfect Crime, Drug-Induced Dementia, The Perfect Crime. And she highlights exactly what neurologically is happening by taking these drugs and how it literally makes dementia. And that's why people get dementiated and they have these cognitive problems and become disabled. So my story is that I thought, all right, let's take a stand. Let's see if I can change, because this lawsuit was so important. There was only two or three others in the country that had ever gone and tried this. And we went further than any other lawsuit. Other ones had problems and they didn't have funding and some issues that came up. We took it and we got to that 7th District Court, the federal court, and they ruled and said, yes, this is illegal. That set precedence for our area, our state, Illinois, and other states, which really is saying it is not okay. I've licked my wounds for the last year or so just because I was worried. I was worried that I was going to get heat from the governor, from his office, from JB. I was waiting to see if I was going to get countersued by the psychiatrist that I went, because it cost her and her insurance company, I'm sure, a couple $100,000 to go through this. I mean, the paperwork, you can't even imagine. Thousands and thousands of pages and motions and things that have gone back and forth. And so I was kind of curious to see what was going to happen. Nothing has happened. I've been very quiet. This is the first time I've talked about it publicly, other than posting a statement on the attorney's website, because a lot of people were following this. Nationally, people were following this. A lot of attorneys, a lot of class action attorneys, big companies that go after like drug, or they go after like big tobacco or things like that. They were following this too, because what this really would mean is that if we would have been able to get to court and we would have won, every doctor immediately would have been vulnerable. They would have had to change their practice immediately and said, look, you have to follow the Congress guidelines now saying you're only going to use medications that are known to be safe and effective. You can't just do anything. And you have to realize drug companies are changing how you're prescribing. We're vulnerable. If I give you gifts and I tell you all this information, slowly you start to behave differently. And that's what doctors are doing. They're slowly changing what they're giving you based not on the science, based on what a drug company's telling them. And what the drug companies are saying, use the most expensive drug. This is our new drug, it's the best, it's great, it's wonderful, it's a cure-all. That's been going on for over 100 years. People have done that, elixirs, snake oils, that's been going on a long time. I mean, I got a lecture that we gave where we actually showed the old, little flyers from like 1800s where they'd say, this would cure this and this and this, and it was a snake oil salesman. That's what the antidepressants are now. I mean, they work, but they don't work because of the chemical agent. That's been proven numerous times now. Irving Kirsch has highlighted it's a placebo, sugar pill. That's it. They've even given people the sugar pill compared to the antidepressants. I'm giving you a sugar pill, but it's going to work. Your depression will go down, but you've got to take this pill every day in order for it to work. Now you'd think, well, that's silly. And sure enough, your depression goes down the exact same, almost exact, clinically the same as the antidepressant group. And we're not talking one person. We're talking, they do a big study, random assignment and whatnot. So they know that kind of, it's more about who we are and what we do and how we think than any of the chemical agents that we're putting in the body. So what can you do?
Could you reinstitute the court case?
Not that one, but any other case.
Why not the one that you basically...
Because I agreed to dismiss and not refile. That was the agreement that I would do. Basically, it was a walk-away. I walk away from that psychiatrist, you know, they walk away from me, the court washes, doesn't sanction me, doesn't sanction her, doesn't try to do... Everyone just walks away. It literally was a walk-away. The only thing that we benefit from, really, is, one, the model is there. I mean, if anybody ever wanted this, the model is all there, it's all ready to go. And the Seventh Court has ruled now, saying it is absolutely. So it would be pretty easy to kind of walk that line and go through it again and do it. You had a question?
That same evidence?
Not the evidence for that case, but it would be pretty easy. I mean, it's easy to get. How I got the evidence? I took an ad for I think it was 1 day, maybe 2, maybe it was 2 days. 2 days in a newspaper, a little ad about this big. It said, "Are you a Medicaid patient? Have you been given any of these medications before you were the age of 18? Because I wanted to go with there for kids. You may be entitled to compensation for a class action lawsuit or for a lawsuit." I think I left it blank. It's not class action, but a lawsuit. And I listed the drugs that had no clinically indication, medically accepted indication for a minor. So these drugs should never be used for a minor, according to the FDA and the databases that they allow. So I was like, if anybody has been given these, it's an automatic slam dunk. I had, I think, 10 people call me in those 2 days. And that was in Sheboygan, in a little newspaper article, or a little ad that I ran. And I looked at them, and then I chose ultimately one person, got those records, and then we talked, and again, they knew exactly what they were doing and what we wanted to do and what it was all about. So anybody could do it. I mean, you could do it, anybody could do it. And the only thing you have to do is have the person sign a release for the medical records, see that it's right there, and if you see those drugs, you pretty much can walk it over and hand it to an attorney and say, "Here you go, this is what I want to do." They know they're in a world of crap. I mean, there's no question that they know they're in a world of crap. I mean, the governor's office, you know, probably doesn't want to touch it because it's a hot potato, because it's like, wait a minute, you know, you're going to have the American Medical Association up in arms, insurance company up in arms, Medicaid in general, they don't want to do this. I mean, they're all culpable, you know, for doing this. I was kind of surprised at JB, you know, for not stepping up, because I was like, it was so clear on his website of cases that they've gone after and won for the exact thing that we're doing. Except we're not going after the drug company, we're going after the doctor, saying, you should know better, and you're the one writing the prescription out. If they're responsible for marketing it wrong, that led them to write the prescription, and that constitutes fraud, then how are they not part of that chain? They're the ones actually doing it. And ignorance, you know, is one thing, but there's you know, the Congress says you can't just claim ignorance. You should know. Again, if you're signing an agreement saying that this is what you're going to do, and you're going to take federal money, then you need to be aware that, hey, this is what you can and can't write prescriptions for. And now there would be no way they could play stupid, because this case obviously came out. Medicaid's well aware of it and stuff. So it's a little bit different. And actually, I talked with someone at Medicaid. When I called and I wrote my notes down and stuff, highlighted, and I said, I want to be clear. When I was getting close to doing the case, I said, is this true and correct? And the woman I talked with, this woman who was basically she was one of the top brass of Medicaid, basically. And she confirmed it. I said, so if a child's this age and they get this drug and it's not FDA approved, then it can't be written. She's like, yes, exactly. Thank you. Next time we came back, like months later with this case, whole different story. Well, it's complicated and there's this issue. And it was like, wait a minute, you said this. And then the affidavit came out from Medicaid saying, nope, we think it's perfectly okay. And we were like, that's just not right.
One possibility would be to find an organization. Let me use one that doesn't apply to, but gives it, like the Alliance Defense Fund will take cases of all types
sure.
in a certain genre of cases.
Yeah. Well, I have an attorney who'll do it for free. Yeah, that's not the problem. We got an attorney. I mean, you know, he'll do it in a second. So that's not the concern. It's just finding a person, again, to do it. It took a lot of my time up. It did. I mean, it wore me out. That's why, like I said, you know, it's been, well, when did I put my my statement, when we released the case, I came out with a statement December 6, 2013. And I think I dropped the case. We were supposed to start the trial December 9th, 2013. And then December 3rd, At the pretrial conference, the judges here threatened Watson with substantial award of money. You know, and that was where it was like, all right, that's the end of it. So yeah, we had to basically withdraw the case then, and I think I withdrew the case right around that time. But yeah, it was a couple of years of doing it. Yeah.
What advice do you have for all these kids that were diagnosed as being ADD? Where was that?
For the kids, what I tell them, and when I see the kids, I tell them, I said, there's nothing wrong with you. You don't have any biological chemical imbalance. There's no, ADHD bug that's inside you, because they'll say it like that. The things you're being given are not aspirin, they're not, vitamins, where kids are told, well, they're like vitamins. And I tell them, I say, you're struggling maybe with concentration, or maybe you got a lot of energy and stuff. Yeah, you know what? I was like that too. I definitely would have been labeled ADHD, who knows what else at that time. You'll find something that interests you at some point. We got to find how to relate to you, teach you, get you active, get you involved. And we need to maybe look at some other things with your mom and dad or grandparents or maybe your church, or if there isn't a church, or we need to look at the school and the teachers. I guarantee you that if a child is having a problem, either it's a skill deficit, that there's some sort of skill that they've got to learn, like either how to focus or how to read, or dyslexia, or maybe an eye issue, or appetite, or nutrition, or caffeine, or bedtime. There's something there. And there's an unhappiness in his soul, or his psyche, or his environment. He's getting teased, he feels small, inferior, sad. Something is going on somewhere. He's not the problem. He's the symptom of whatever the problem is. If you have like a little... the analogy I give, if you have like a little tadpole in your stream, a little frog or something comes out, and you see it and it's got 6 legs, you don't drug the frog and say the frog's the problem. The frog's telling you something upstream is not right. You got to figure out what's not right to take care of that little tadpole. He's the most vulnerable of all the species are on that, on that line. Children are the most vulnerable. They can't really make change. Change happens from the top down, because people have power up here. When you have classroom sizes that are getting out of control, or you got parents that are not married and maybe they're having, divorce issues, and there may be abuse issues, or maybe, on his street corner there's tons of drug dealing and violence and rape and prostitution and lots of stuff like that, how's that kid surviving? Pretty hard. Pretty hard to sit and focus on mathematics when I got 50 other things going on in the back of my mind. Heck, you guys have a bad day at work? You're driving home on the highway, all of a sudden you're like, oh crap, I missed my exit. That's ADD. That's all it is. I was thinking about this in the back of my mind, not paying attention, and all of a sudden I got distracted. That is ADD. That's the epitome of it. If you're free from distraction, you'll do just fine. Doing it 10 years at my clinic, and before that I worked at the second largest treatment facility in Illinois for kids, residential, outpatient, and also day treatment facility. I've never once referred a child for medication.
Do you taper them off of that?
I can't, quote unquote, taper them off because I'm not a medical doctor. I'm the talk doctor or psych doctor. But I've had lots of patients come off. We always try to work with the MD and always try to help them try to coordinate. A lot of MDs don't know how to taper off. There's no protocols for it. There's protocols to get on it, but almost zero to do anything but getting off of it. And mind you, the kids in Medicaid, the ones that we're paying for and stuff, a lot of them, they're not just on one medication. These kids are taking 6, 7, 8, 12 medications. I guarantee you, there is no data out there to say that taking more than 2 medications is safe, effective. They don't have a clue what's going on in their brain. I mean, go back 30 years ago, it would be literally, you'd lose your license maybe for doing polypharmacy like that, where you're giving that kind of meds. Nowadays, it's standard of care, which is the problem, because you can't, these people get hurt, and these children develop, boys developing breasts, obesity, they're developing, tics and movements, irreversible type things, psychosis, death. You take neuroleptics, you're going to die much faster than if you didn't ever take the neuroleptic. And those drugs or studies have been shown very clearly, and it's dose dependent. The higher the dose, the more psychotropic neuroleptics, the faster you'll die. Over, I think it was a, I don't want to...
What happens if they take them and just throw them?
You mean don't use them?
Yep.
Well, yeah, a lot of kids do that. Kids a lot of times don't want to take them.
Problems?
Well, yeah, I would tell someone never to stop a psychotropic abruptly. starting a drug and stopping are the most dangerous, always. So never start or stop, abruptly. It should be tapered down. And really, you should have a physician work with them. But the problem is that a lot of physicians won't do that. If you get on a drug, they'll be quick to put you on it. Try getting off of it. They'll like, whoa, let's talk about that here. Hold on a minute. And there's two ways to get medicated. Frustrate your psychiatrist or therapist, or scare them. Those are the two ways you're going to get. They will talk therapy or anything else they'll do. Social worker, family therapist, doesn't matter. They will work with you until you scare them or frustrate them. Meaning that, well, gee, we've been working together 3 months and I just don't see you getting better, so I think you probably need to go get some medications. At my clinic, I say, if 3 months gone by and they're not having improvement and helping, we're not blaming the patient. We're looking at ourselves and holding the mirror up and saying, what are we missing? What are we not getting here? And we'll refer them to another therapist before we'll say, go, get intoxicated. Question?
You started to answer a question. If I could get you to go back to it. What do we do?
Yeah.
What can we do?
Here's my thinking. Either A, if someone's really active and they're willing to take it on, I would say, give me a call. I will link you up with all this information and even the attorney. Do exactly what I did, place a little ad. You'll get a call instantly. As soon as you get it, you talk about what the case is about with the person. They get informed consent. They give a release for their records. You get their medical records, and you simply go down and you highlight all the drugs that weren't approved and not okay. You put that into maybe a little Excel spreadsheet, or you give it to someone like me or someone else that puts it in an Excel spreadsheet, and they literally, the attorney takes it and runs with it at that point, and your job's almost done. At that point, they file notice with the court, which is under seal. Under this type of thing, it goes under seal because you're suing on behalf of the government. You're saying, I know you're being frauded. I'm going to sue on your behalf. So the government has first right. They look at the case and they say, the state attorney general say, all right, this looks pretty good. It's a lot of money. We're going to take it and we're going to go after it. Or they say, we don't think it's worthwhile, or we don't think it's totally there. Here you go. You run with it. If you run with it, you get a little bit more. You can actually share in part of the money you get. You recapture money, you get to share part of it. I forget the exact percentage, but if you get $1,000, maybe you get a certain percent, and the state gets. They get the vast majority of it.
I might get that $250,000 or $1 million lawsuit back at you.
Well, there's something called whistleblower. You have a protection. Because if you're a whistleblower saying, hey, this is going on, they can't just come after you and say, oh, you did. If it's frivolous, totally frivolous, yeah, and you just sue for something silly, they could come after you. This has already been past all that, so there's no way someone, I think, would ever get sued for that type of issue. At some point, you get to that federal judge again, and he or she, I guess, I don't know how many there are, but I suppose in theory they could say, well, you're not prepared and ready. We recognize there were issues going to trial. And this was uncharted territory. My attorney, again, a great guy, really knowledgeable. I had one second attorney as backup from Kokana, up against the Goliath, which were the insurance company attorneys for the psychiatrists, who then we heard from the judge. The American Medical Association was involved. The drug companies were involved. They said, he told me point blank, he's like, I'm paraphrasing, you don't think this is going to stop here, do you, Dr. Watson? This isn't going to stop. This isn't going to end here. This has now got the American Medical Association, it's got the drug company. This is going to go on for appeals, and I don't think you're prepared. I don't think your attorneys are prepared. They're incompetent. Your attorneys are incompetent. I'm almost mandating, I'm thinking about requiring you to hire a big law firm in Milwaukee here to help represent them. I'm not going to mandate it yet, but I'm going to give you a day or two to think about it. And if you come back, we'll talk. I strongly suggest you settle this. You need to settle this. That was after 20 minutes, and after he gave me 7 cases of how he ordered people to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars in opposite attorney fees. There was no way he wanted this case.
But that same situation wouldn't exist if somebody took this case now and this evidence forward?
It could. He would maybe make a little claim trying to, because he doesn't want it, and they don't want to rock the boat like this, and he was getting heat from wherever he was getting heat. But if we had a few things, locked up a little tighter, I might have gone for it and taken the risk. I mean, there's $250,000 I figured on my that I was looking at. I'm like, I might have taken the risk.
Isn't that where an organization in back of you as a plaintiff?
Sure.
Wouldn't that make the difference? I mean,
that would. Well, keep it in mind, it has to be a person that sues. It can't be an organization because
we got to put our neck out there,
it's a person, right? Right. Well, and I had thought of that too, because there's a lot of activists that I know, that are into this that really don't have a lot, and they don't. I mean, they live month to month. They're living in a little apartment. They got $2,000 to their name, and I said, next time if I did again, that would be the person. I would have been the backer, but I would have put it in their name, or I would have had them say, hey, why don't you do this? Because they would have been like, all right, fine. Sanction me $250 if we lose. Big deal. Ain't gonna make a difference anyway. And we would have taken care of them for their life anyway. Then said, all right, fine. We'll pay you rent for your life, and you don't have to worry. So yeah, it would have been nice to have that. So, any other quick questions? Then we'll have to wrap up. I know.
Do you have a list of the most offending drugs?
Yeah. In my case, there was an article.
I mean, are there certain drugs we should be looking out for?
If they say psychotropic or psychiatric, yeah, without question. I would never take one. I just won't. Yeah.
I'm just wondering how much cooperation or resistance do you get when you're working with individual families and the psychiatrist?
The families that I work with, almost 100%, I would say, are incredibly supportive. And usually, I'll get the kids, and parents and kids will be crying in my office because they'll be in the system 5-6 years, and they never heard this. They've never been told anything. And I show them actually what happens to the neurons. I draw a little diagram and say, well, this is what's happening, this is what's changing, this is why you're struggling. And they will be sitting here crying in the office, not knowing this. And the kids, a lot of times, will end up telling me, if I get too emotional, will tell me stuff like, I knew there was nothing wrong with me. It's really because blah, blah, blah. And they'll go into this long story of what's really going on for them. And I'm like, yes, of course this is what's going on.
One other thing,
Yeah.
that is, once they get into that situation where they're almost like wards of the state,
Yeah.
and social services is not supporting them,
No.
trying to help them get out of that,
Yeah.
because they don't know what they're talking about. And so then you've got this vicious cycle trying to get them out. Because when I was taking care of people, I had some people that are in their 30s ended up in a nursing home.
Oh, sure, yeah.
You're fighting with the psychiatrist.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, and you have to, unfortunately, I've seen it. I see disabled people all the time in their 20s and 30s, and I'm paying the bill for them to get their checks and to be living and go to Health and Human Services, and it's just, and I'm like, this is a crazy world that we're going. I'm like, what are you people doing? And the problem is a lot of the people mean well. I get it. The social workers, doctors at Health and Human Services, they mean well, and these people are coming from very chaotic environments and homes and stuff, so I have empathy for them. But they've got to start thinking outside the box and recognizing you're infantilizing people. You're making them dependent state of the state, and it's going worse and worse and worse. Yes?
We found out that, just like you mentioned, that doctors don't like to report side effects on drugs, that individuals can do it by 800 number.
Correct. Yep.
And I think it's important because when you do try to tell the doctors, they kind of just act like it's just a normal,
Sure.
Condition. It's not part of the
Yeah, they know best.
So it's so underreported.
Yeah. No, you're right. And I don't know if it's that they don't like to report. My guess is that, because I know a lot of the MDs, in fact, I treat a couple of them, is that they're too busy. Boom, they're told how many patients they should be seeing per hour, and it's kind of a quota. And if they want to make their money and stuff, that's kind of what they're doing. And it's the mill. That's what they call it. At least a couple of them. It's the mill. In and out, in and out, in and out. And they're not happy.
Well, then the drugs really have a lot more side effects for a lot more people, and it's not reported. So if
Correct.
more people would report it,
Right.
you'd have a much better record.
Yeah, well, and that's what Glenn Mullen and Moore, those researchers that looked at the FDA database, they highlighted that. Again, we're talking about maybe 1%. It's a small little sliver that actually gets reported.
But reporting is one thing. Enforcement is the problem we got.
Right.
You won't report what you want.
Yeah.
And when you're hearing what these, I'm going to call the cartels are doing,
Right.
which is what our friend in Oklahoma describes in current medical practice,
Yeah.
those cartels are going to destroy you, destroy anybody who gets in.
Well, and there's a lot of...
Enforcement is going to be the problem.
You have a lawsuit, then it would just help if you had a legal track record of
Sure.
how bad you're going.
Yeah, and there's a lot of people that believe exactly that's what's happened. This war on drugs, it wasn't that. It was, let's switch to people who are using the illegal drugs and giving all the money to the South Americans. Let's make our own classification of drugs, which can make people feel kind of good and not care about stuff. And we'll make it legal, and we'll get the poor people to do it, and the working class people will pay for it.
Do you think that's true?
I got to say that I do, because I'm like, to me, I'm like, really? You're going to give somebody a neuroleptic drug, which we know will kill people and disable them, but marijuana they can't have? I'm like, I'm not going to smoke marijuana. I will never tell someone to smoke marijuana. But if someone wants to go smoke marijuana, have at it. And to me, the government should stay out of it. You know, and say, hey, if that's what they want to do, let them do it. And I think it's not good for them, but I think there's something to be said. But I think we should inform people. And I think that's where we can play a part, letting people know about the good and the bad, and educate them, and take money out of the government. That's the biggest problem, is that the money corrupts, and then you don't get information. So.
All right, we better stop. I wish we could go on.
Yeah.
Very much.
Yeah, thank you.